Councillor Lewis is in the chair. Okay, resuming the meeting, folks, and welcome to Gary and Justine from Bay Venues. So, are you going to have a presentation for us?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Brownless, good afternoon, councillors. Look, it's my pleasure to be here this afternoon, and really the purpose of the presentation is just to give you a timely update on the feasibility study that Bay Venues were successful in obtaining funding for through the last LTP. We have initiated that work, and we feel it's important that we update council on the work that we have been undertaking. So really that's the objective of the presentation here today, along with introducing you to the project steering group that's been set up around the governance of this project, and the consultant team that Bay Venues have secured to undertake the feasibility study. And I'll introduce those people in a moment who are all sitting behind me. But first I'd like to start with something that I heard when I was last in this chamber about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it was the most encouraging thing I think I've ever heard in this chamber. We're a growing city, and there are increasing demands for certain leisure activities. Maybe we need to think about expanding our holdings so we can provide facilities in a way that doesn't compromise everything all the time. You know, the idea that as a growing city we provide an enormous amount of land for more housing, but we don't provide a similar growth in our assets for community facilities seems somewhat at odds with good planning. And when I heard that, my eyes sort of lit up and a bit of a smile on my face, and I thought that would be a fantastic introduction, some background and context for what we're doing here today. So thank you, Councillor Robson. I couldn't agree with you more. So as I've said, the purpose is to update council on the feasibility study that Bay Venues are currently undertaking into an aquatic and recreation centre in the CBD, which was approved and funded by council through the LTP process. In terms of the progress that we've made so far, prior to seeking the funding to undertake the feasibility study, we undertook a needs assessment, and that's in alignment with the best practice that around planning for community facilities that's been put out by Sport New Zealand. The needs assessment was completed. We then presented to the LTP process. We were successful in obtaining the funding for the feasibility study. And we then, at the end of last year, engaged a consultant team and set up some project governance around that. Just in terms of where we're talking about, just to remind you, now please don't take these images as anything more than just to give you an indication of where we're talking about and the sorts of components that may or may not end up in the facility. I've got an architect sitting behind me who's incredibly nervous that we've got these sorts of photos on the screen. So this just to illustrate where we're talking about, and you may remember seeing this slide when I presented to you in the LTP process. So this is Memorial Park, obviously. The white building in the foreground is the QEYC and Memorial Hall, and then everything beyond that is sort of conjecture at this point. And there's types of components that could end up, depending on the outcome of the feasibility study, the indoor space, indoor aquatic space, and potentially some outdoor aquatic space that could hopefully be the majority of that would be revenue generating for the facility in general. In terms of what we learnt when we did the needs assessment, we basically confirmed what we already know. So 2 of the 3 aquatic facilities on the Tauranga side of the harbour are no longer fit for purpose, or there is a question mark about their life expectancy. We've got some ageing aquatic assets in our network, which obviously equate to increased operational costs for us and an increased risk of unscheduled pool closures due to asset failures. The shape and type of aquatic facilities that we have over this side of the harbour don't provide for what people want to use aquatic facilities for in this day and age, and so therefore we have limited revenue streams to cover those increasing costs. There is a greater demand for sports, recreation and leisure facilities to cater for the growth of the city and particularly the CBD. So what we came to you and asked for was $150,000 in this financial year to undertake the feasibility study, but we also were successful in the provisional inclusion in the LTP in years 4 and 5 of $30 million worth of capital funding for the design, consenting and construction of a potential facility. Obviously that provisional capital project funding will need to be confirmed during the next LTP and is subject to the findings of the feasibility study. So we thought we'd better get on with the feasibility study, and that is needing to look at a range of things, in particular the financial sustainability of any facility that could go into this location or any other location, the range of opportunities and services, test the market demand, look at the location analysis and the land constraints, look at the ownership and operating model, the management and governance of the facility, look at the stakeholders, what is their view, what's the funding model, and the project management and timeframe. So all those are the sorts of things that we're looking at through the feasibility study at the moment. In terms of the methodology, I'm not sure if you can see this, but basically the study itself, the first component which we're looking at now on the bright green on the left-hand side is really about investigation. So that's all to do with analysing the site, and the preferred site, as I've mentioned, is Memorial Park. And then when we get to the end of the analysis around the site constraints at that particular location, we'll be able to make a decision about confirmation of continuing this feasibility study in that location or not. And so the upcoming milestones in terms of the project at the moment are really around that confirmation of the site analysis and the functional design brief, which is due to be presented to the Bay Venues Board for consideration in their April meeting. So just before I take questions, I wanted to introduce you to the project steering group that sits around this project, and also to the consultant team. So the project steering group firstly has been put together and has representation from Bay Venues from an operational perspective, and so that's through Tina. Where is Tina? Tina Harris-Ranui, who'll be familiar to councillors, who's our venues and programs manager. I'm also myself as the main project lead for the feasibility study in terms of the Bay Venues component, and Gary, who's also on the project steering group. We also have representation from Sport Bay of Plenty, so I have Zane Jensen behind me, and Zane is the community facilities advisor at Sport Bay of Plenty. And we're very fortunate to also have on our project steering group Jamie Dallach from Sport New Zealand. And Jamie is the Sport New Zealand Spaces and Places advisor, so he sits on a number of groups like this all across the country that are grappling with the same types of issues around particularly their aquatic and other recreational community facility needs. And we also have from Council Megan Cleverly, who unfortunately isn't able to be here this afternoon, as a member of our project steering group as well. And in terms of the consultant team, Bay Venues undertook a very rigorous procurement process last year, and successful in that was the lead consultants, Visitor Solutions, and Craig Jones is here from Visitor Solutions. So Visitor Solutions is a niche consultancy that focuses on sports, recreation, tourism and leisure. Craig is the founder and principal and has worked for several organisations involved in outdoor recreation, leisure, sport and tourism. So he spends most of his time undertaking feasibility studies and business cases for projects like this, particularly for local government across the country. Alongside Visitor Solutions, we have HDT Architects, who are the lead architects in the team, and from HDT Architects we have Mark Bates here this afternoon. So Mark has been with HDT since 2001, so the last 15 years have primarily been spent on the design, documentation and delivery of new and refurbished municipal sports and aquatic centres in diverse parts of the country. So this is really Mark's bread and butter in terms of municipal aquatic facilities. And last but not least, the local component of the consultant team is Boffa Miskell, and we have Rebecca Ryder here this afternoon, who's the senior principal landscape architect, and Rebecca will be familiar to most of you and certainly has a lot of experience with recreation reserves and facilities in the Tauranga community. Rebecca has been responsible for the delivery of numerous reserve concept plans for TCC, including the Memorial Park Reserve Management Plan itself. So that's it from me, and I'm happy to take any questions or put any questions to the consultant team. Thank you.
Thank you, Justine. The area of concern to me is, and it's certainly well liked by the younger people in town, is that miniature railway. Whatever you intend to do, I presume that you're going to take that into consideration and perhaps build around that. Can you give us a bit of an idea of what your intention is there?
Yes, absolutely. So we have engaged with all of the key stakeholders, as I mentioned, including all the existing tenants of Memorial Park, and we've had numerous conversations with those tenants, including the miniature railway people. And at this point in time, there is a high level of support from the model railway people for a project, subject to obviously not impeding too much on their current facility. But it has come to light that they have some aspects of their current operations that are problematic for them in terms of the placement of tracks, etc., and that they would not be adverse to moving some of their facility if they could get a superior outcome for the operation of those tracks. But the high-level initial investigations would not require much, if any, of an impact on the model railway.
Yeah, firstly, before the question, I'd like to acknowledge and thank you for making public my position on community facilities. I have frequently been mischaracterised by some of my colleagues and others in the community as being against community facilities, when in fact I'm for the prudent delivery of facilities in line with the requirements and affordable constraints of our community. So I really appreciate that. Yeah, it's important that we don't demonise people who, for instance, reject the idea of a $55 million museum as stupid. Coming back to the question for me is, you've done quite a bit of work clearly already. You've settled on a site. Is it possible, and I don't know what the rules are, to share? I'd be really interested to know what the economic analysis is, and I speak here not as a ward councillor, but I'm conscious that there is a feeling in the community that the CBD has been sucking up an enormous amount of resource with fantasy projects with no delivery for a significant period of time. The western side of the city, and I make no comment on the relative merits of ward councillors, but the western side of the city, Bethlehem, no library, no swimming pool, not much, and the facilities seem to be dying a death. On the eastern side of the city, all sorts of promises about what's coming, and the CBD, we know where that sits. Is it possible for you to give us something so we can understand how that site selection came about? Because whether we like it or not, you're a council-controlled organisation. The responsibility for these things ultimately, and any discussion with the community, will be held by 11 members of council. What can you give us to show us why you arrived at that point for this stuff?
Yeah, sure, and I'm happy to provide the presentation that formed part of our early thinking around the decision, not so much to, I wouldn't characterise it to settle on the site, but certainly to settle on the preferred site for investigation, which is Memorial Park. So some of the reasons that fed into that analysis that we did were a gap analysis of BVL's current facilities and network across the city, looking at what we've currently got where, taking from that the facilities that are fit for purpose out of the complete audit. You're obviously left with a bit of a gap. The gap was largest in the aquatic facilities space. There was a very real identification of vulnerability in the CBD and on the western side of the city in terms of aquatic facilities, given that there's 3 here. 2 are over 50 years old. 1 of those is only open for 4 or 5 months of the year, and the other one's quite a way out at Greerton, which is, you know, a fair way out of town. So on top of that, we overlaid the population projections and what we know about the future urban growth centres, and we then factored into that the intensification in the CBD and the future tertiary institute.
If there's any economic, you know, I mean, I know the overlay, the in-principle stuff, but people are often misled by pictures. I suppose I'm interested in any numbers, any economic analysis.
Sorry, the thing that
underneath that stuff.
Failed to mention, that underlying all of that is the is the preference to investigate where we have existing assets that we could leverage. And so that played a key part in the Memorial Park site, given that we have three facilities there, QEYC, Memorial Hall and the Memorial Pool as well. So that played into that analysis. In terms of the economic analysis of this study, obviously that we're not at that point yet, but we will be sharing that with Council through the proposed mechanism that was in your paper.
Right, here we go. So my question was along the same lines around the choice of location. In your presentation, you got to a point where after the site analysis or the location analysis work, if it's found not to be suitable, what's the next step? Because I wouldn't like to stop. I'd like it to continue and look at other potential locations that would fit the demand. What's the intent?
We consciously and purposely haven't invested too much time and energy looking at Site B at this point, given that our preference was very clearly Memorial Park. But we did enter the contract with Visitor Solutions so that we clearly tagged that there was a component of site investigation. We would then get to a go or no-go point in Memorial Park, and then we will have to come back together with advice from Bay Venues, the Bay Venues Board, and in collaboration with Council to look at alternative sites. But we're not at that point yet.
Thanks, Justine. I'm really pleased to see that you are looking into an outdoor facility possibility, because you know, whilst the Memorial Pool is ageing and we're not getting as much from it as we you know might have because of the closing for 6 months. It's fabulous in the summer to go down there, and my grandkids went down. You know, to swim outdoors and have fresh air is a real plus. Having to go indoors and be exposed to all the chlorine and everything else is, you know, a challenge. So I'm glad that's being looked at. Will you be looking at the potential of being able to heat it and use it, you know, in the other 6 months if it's outdoor? And that brings us to the question of the site, which is the fact there is hot water there. If you could comment on that. And is the feasibility, or is it too early to look into alternative water treatments so that we're not, you know, even for the indoor, that we're not having to rely upon chlorine and so on, which in these days is becoming less and less, the ozone treatments. Could you just comment on those, I think, and that's me.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the first component of your question around the outdoor swimming, outdoor enjoyment, outdoor amenity, that is a, you know, probably citywide, that would be a significant component of that site, and so it's very important for us to, one of the drivers of this project is to ensure that the functional design brief delivers on outdoor aquatic enjoyment. One of the things that we're just waiting on confirmation is in terms of the geothermal capacity of the site. So that is something that we are waiting to hear back from the engineers as part of the consultant work, and that will form part of the, you know, given what we know about that, that will then form part of what we can do there around that. At the moment, I guess we're characterising it as the outdoor aquatic component being either sort of a spa, hot pool type complex, or a sort of a, for want of a better word, a sort of splash planet outdoor recreation park that would have the ability to generate revenue for the facility. Yeah. In terms of the second part of your question around the water treatment options, I'm going to pass that one over to Craig or Mark to answer.
I mean, okay. Thank you, Justine. Yes, so just to answer that, yes, we can cover off different options around that.
I assume affordability is going to be a part of it, but it would be good to see that presented so we can choose.
Thank you. Previous manager of Bay Swim and Swimway Swim Club, I completely agree that Odomoti is nearing the end of its useful life, and I've certainly spent some hours evaporating those chlorine fumes that Councillor Baldock's talking about. No judgment. In the report, Justine, on your under 7, the clarification required from council, the community engagement, you referred to, and this may actually be a question for Christine Jones, that we've got some projects coming up, such as the car parking redevelopment and walkway to the CBD. Aware of what the proposed walkway to the CBD is, but what's the car parking redevelopment that's in that report?
So just from what we've learnt from the staff that have been involved with this project, there is some issues with the adequacy of car parking at Memorial Park at the moment, and the sort of, Martin, you might be a better place to answer this than me. Am I on the right track?
You are on the right track. We did have a discussion about transport requirements if the project was going to land in that space, and we did raise the issue of, car parking has to be thought about through a traffic impact assessment. Yeah.
Aside from this project, I understand that there is some work already happening in council around the current car parking layout at the park itself. Is that correct?
I'd probably pass over to Mark Smith as the manager of that asset to answer that question.
Good afternoon. There might be some cross wires here. We're not looking at car parking Memorial Park. Maybe what it's referring to is the fact that when you consider a new activity under the RMA, you have to consider the appropriate amount of car parks in the city plan and to make an assessment based on the demand that you anticipate coming along to the site.
Yeah, Justine, I forgot to ask you before, just aside from the feasibility study,
Yeah, those are all conversations that we are having currently, and we will continue to have them in more detail as we progress through the feasibility study and get a more detailed understanding of the quantum of funding that we are seeking and the operating model of the facility. We've put an estimate in the LTP in terms of the capital project funding, which is $30 million. But in terms of anything we might need aside from that, no, that will be becoming apparent when we get to the business case end of this project.
Thank you.
I've got two questions. Just the first one is, what is the likely useful life of a project of this nature? That's the first part of the question.
3 years.
50 years or 30 years? Okay, so thank you. So that sets the second part of the question is, with the both indoor and outdoor sports sort of wax and wane in popularity, basketball goes up, is rapidly rising at the moment, and so is volleyball, and others will be declining and that sort of thing. So to what degree will the architects be building in flexibility as to use to deal with different types of sports as they come and go?
Sure, and one of our key drivers is the assumption that whatever we do in terms of the indoor space is suitable for the majority of indoor sports, and we have a very good understanding of what they are currently within our network, and obviously we have a long history of operating our network. So whilst you're right about changes in different sports that come and go, the majority of them require the same basic space, apart from a few which I'm sure council are aware that we haven't got adequate facilities for at the moment. But we're very concerned to make sure that this space is a multi-purpose aquatics and indoor recreation centre that can cater for as much as possible in the one central hub, which will drive efficiencies and ensure that we are utilising our limited capital resources in the best way possible as a city. Part of that conversation too is whether at some point we will need to ask ourselves whether we need to rationalise our existing aquatics network. And so, as you know, we do have some community pools in areas, for example, Otomotai, and part of this work will need to look at what makes sense in terms of continuing to invest in those types of facilities. So we're very driven by trying to come to an outcome that has the best return for the maximum number of people.
it's been pretty comprehensive, and thanks to your colleagues for coming along as well, ready to answer questions too. Do they have anything they wish to say? Yeah. No. Okay.
Could I just make a closing comment? I'm taking it that if the report's being moved, then the council is happy with the proposed mechanism in the report to update council primarily through the CCO working group along the way for the rest of this calendar year. Great, thank you.
Yeah, happy to move recommendations A, B, C and D.
Seconded by Councillor Mason.
Just in speaking to it, thanks Gary and Justine and all of the steering group for the presentation, and you know, I personally am very excited about the project. I think since we began the discussions, you know, it's never failed to start to stack up. We have to see the feasibility come through, but it is an exciting project. It's part of the city transformation. The reason it's exciting for it to be so close to the CBD is that we want to see, you know, 4,000 to 5,000 people living here in the CBD, and an aquatic and recreational facility so close will be a real service to that, as well as the wider community. So many people go to Memorial Park, you know, every weekend. It's a really enjoyable place, and the idea you can swim and be in a park facility, I think, is a really good one. I just hope we don't start at this point, as we often do, raising issues of other locations. It's not going to be a question of this facility and no other. We definitely have a need in the west. We definitely need to see that planning start soon, because the growing population in the lakes and Tauriko West and its development area, Bethlehem already, and then of course Otamoto. If that pool can't be continued for too much longer, then we must look at those situations out there. So it becomes another project we need to look at some point, funding and of course you know, being permitted. But this is part of our job, to deliver these facilities, and I welcome Councillor Robson's excellent comments, which I congratulate you, Justine, on picking up on. This is our job, to actually foresee the future and provide constantly these necessary facilities for our city as it grows.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I think going forward, I appreciate the communication through the CCO working group, but it's I can't emphasise enough the need to be aware of the constraints council or the council of the day is working within. The last project which we approved in the LTP, which has come up for some scrutiny, was Te Papo Ngā Manu Porotakataka, and that particular park was basically went 25% over what was budgeted in the LTP. Of course, the Mount Base track, that's another story, and even yesterday in the Bay Times they're talking about the Papamoa Surf Club again needing more money. And within that, the context, council has identified a shortfall of about $128 million within the previous LTP, and some of my learned colleagues bravely attempted to raise the rates above the current rate increase. However, that failed to actually solve the problem, and it failed to pass as well. So yeah, if you could be really cognizant of the environment that we're working in, it's going to be a challenge. It may even have to shift in terms of the LTP somewhere, but that will be for the next triennium to decide. Thank you.
Yeah, look, I certainly support the recommendations for sure, and brings back many memories for me. That Memorial swimming pool has been down there since I was a little kid, and certainly a few years ago for sure. And to be honest with you, Memorial Park in general hasn't had a lot done to it, and it is in desperate need of something happening. So it would be great to see something like this happening, and I'm sure that all the community will certainly enjoy it. And yeah, I honestly can't wait to see something happening. So great work.
Yeah, it's I'm comfortable with the motion as it stands. Two observations, I suppose, that with regard to paragraph 7 in discussion, I think the work the council is doing on the wider network, the observation is council there, I'm concerned that we're sort of talking almost as two separate entities. I'd like to believe that any work the council is doing is also work that BVL are intimately involved with, given that they will be responsible for effectively building, owning, operating, and maybe one day even transferring these to someone. So I suppose looking for someone to let me know if that's not happening. I think that's quite important. The other observation I'd make is with regard to reporting through the CCO working groups. My experience, having come on to council by the by-election, is they're not an ideal mechanism for reporting back through. So just an observation, reminder to my colleagues that please ask the questions that we'd ask when we're there, and please feed it back to us if you don't get the answers we want. But look, we need to do this. It's an area lacking. The fact that this city, given its proximity to the water and the history of this country, doesn't have a 50-metre pool is always something that's disturbed me slightly. I would like to see something happen in that space. So happy to see this proceed at the moment.
Through the chair, the wider picture is addressed in the reports. If you look at paragraph 7 on page 61, it identifies that council is looking at the wider needs in terms of aquatics and community networks as part of the redesign of the strategy group in council. This is one of the pieces of work that has been identified and will be into the work program. We haven't yet resourced it or scoped it specifically, but it is identified as something that we are needing to progress with some of the urgency to align with this piece of work that BVL are leading. Yep.
That alignment's taking place. I hear BVL and I hear council. I just want to make sure that we are linked up more than they have been.
Yes, so absolutely acknowledged, and it has been picked up.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you. I certainly support it, and just with the background of a few years spent at Baywave, the one common theme that came through years and years of being there with the swim school is that Tauranga needs a 50-metre pool. So I really hope that, you've already noted as a preliminary trend, but I do hope that that community speaks up and lets BVL know what their desire is.
Okay, so I'll put that all in favour, say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Now, okay, so our next item is Baywave Remedial Report. We'll start that in about a minute. Thank you, Gary. You don't escape that easily. DC 42, Baywave Remedial Work Report. So I think Paul's suggestion was that you might like to speak to this to kick it off.
You need to build a 50-metre pool, that's all. So. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The background to this is that, as I think you're all aware, Baywave was built in 2003-2004. It's a relatively young building, and I note one of the architects said that these buildings should have a life of 50 years. This building, being 13 or 14 years old, is not in good shape. it has got some real issues. If you recall, late 2017, we had to close it for a short period of time to do some urgent seismic structural work to get it from a Category D building to a Category C. That was done. But we also have some significant non-seismic structural issues with this building. We have a lot of cracks in panels. We've got cracks in tanks. We've got cracks in channels in the plant room. We've got cracks in the slab floor in the plant room. We have got weather tightness issues. So we have got a roof that is partially leaking. We have got windows that are leaking. We've got a number of other issues, particularly around corrosion, where the original construction company by the name of Mainzeal, who you may have heard of recently, didn't do their job properly. So we've got corrosion in a number of areas. Our opinion is that this work urgently needs to be addressed, particularly the work in the plant room, because the longer we allow these components to deteriorate, the more likelihood that the plant will no longer be able to function, and we put the whole complex at risk, particularly with things like the Ames Games coming, which is, as you know, the most high-profile event that we have, and Bay Wave is an important component of that. So, unfortunately, we're having to come to council to ask for additional funding to help us address this issue. We have had Becca do a pretty comprehensive report on all the issues that are part of this building. They have highlighted the urgency of it, and they have given an estimate for the construction, or to do the remedial work, which comes to just over $2 million when you include some design and consultancy type fees. In addition to that, in their original report, they had some formulas that they put together that added a contingency amount. So at this stage, working with council staff, we are asking for just over $2 million so that we can actually get this project started. We don't believe that we can wait for approval to come as part of the annual plan process, because we do need to appoint project managers. We need to start the procurement process. We need to go through RFPs, more detailed design work, that type of thing, so that we can start this remedial work in late June, July, so that we have it completed before the Ames Games. You may not be aware, but every 3 years we carry out a fairly extensive repair and maintenance program for Bay Wave. This is just something we do every 3 years. We didn't do it last year because of the issues that we had, so it was deferred to this year. So we think that doing it in that late June, early July, early August period is the optimum time to do it, because we already have a scheduled shutdown. There are some other projects that council have approved as part of our capital expenditure, new changing rooms for the Bay Swim area, some water play features, that type of thing. So it makes sense for this urgent remedial work to be done in the period that we're proposing. So really, that's a thumbnail sketch of why we're coming and asking for this additional funding outside of the normal annual plan process.
Thanks very much, Gary and Justine. Can you just work us through a little bit these risk analysis? You've got the P50 and P95, so I'm assuming they're percentiles of degree of certainty of the contingency. Can you just confirm that through, please?
I wouldn't like to pretend that I'm any expert in this, but these are just different formulas that Becca used. So what we're planning to do over the next short period, if we do get approval for the initial work, is to continue doing the design work, continue to do more details, so we can come back and say, here is the any additional costs as a result of the work that we've done. So we then reduce the contingency, if you like, that's required. But this was an early engineering report, that was engineering estimate, and they just really just apply these formulas, and it depends on, my understanding is how much risk you're willing to take. So if you don't want to take any risk at all, then don't have any contingency. If you want to take, you know, what they might call half risk, then there's the P5 and so on. So that's my understanding of it.
I have had for some time concerns about how we manage our finances here in Tauranga City, particularly around the issues of depreciation and the funding of depreciation. And it relates as much to the in-principle decisions around the nature of the curve we're going to apply and the lifespan we allocate, to the point where I actually commissioned privately some research by the University of Waikato to look at our depreciation approaches compared to other city councils. And I did note the earlier comments with regard to Memorial Park and the minimum 50-year expectation, and the absence of a building next door gives the lie to that assumption. Can you give me some insight as to what the current situation is with regard to reserves in relation to Baywave? Where are we financially with regard to Baywave in terms of reserves, in terms of and the approach we're currently adopting?
So through the chair, the useful life would have been assessed as a 50-year aquatic facility, therefore it would have been depreciated, and reserve funding would have been collected as a 50-year aquatic facility. So in short, it will be underfunded from a reserve perspective. We've fully funded the reserve in relation to Baywave. I'd need to confirm what that exact amount is, but it will be based on these, which is why in the resolution with regard to the contingency we've said that will be fully loan funded, not through any reserve, because there will not have been anything collected for that.
I believe my question's been answered. Thank you.
Without sort of tipping us into confidential space, what judicial remedies would be available should council choose to seek them, by way of, you know, looking at the work of consultants, suppliers of materials? Obviously the builder has gone into liquidation. What legal remedies may be available to council should it choose to pursue them?
Yeah, through you, Your Worship. Look, generally there's a 10-year time frame within which you could seek a remedy, particularly in relation to a weather tightness. But we'd need to take some advice whether there was an opportunity to go beyond that. So we could report back to council if you choose.
Other speakers? Oh, sorry, questions here. Other questions? Councillor Brown.
I completely understand that you want to do the new splash pad, change rooms, etc., but is it appropriate to be spending money on nice to haves when there is a must have lingering in this report?
I appreciate the comment you're making, Councillor Brown. I mean, we already have the funding in place for those what you might call nice to haves. Certainly, the changing rooms for Bay Swim, I think, are necessary because we do have, in particular, parents and mums who need that. One of the things that really is missing from Baywave at the moment that we identified a number of years ago was that we need to continue to make sure that it is a place where people want to come. And we believe that by having this additional water play feature is something that will attract more people through there, increase the already, I think, pretty good financial performance of that asset. So it's not something that we're just saying it's a nice to have, and you know it's a bit fluffy. We've sort of decided that is something that's needed to really lift it up, you know, bring new patrons in and improve the financial performance.
Gary, could you please assure us that, or give us information on whether this is just a one-off, or is there anything else, do you think, in Bay Wave that could be subject to the same issues?
Look, I wouldn't like to give you an assurance that it's a one-off, you know, but I can give you an assurance that, you know, we have looked at these issues in detail. We have commissioned, you know, I think the best engineering company that's very familiar with Bay Wave, Becker, to do the work. They've been very thorough, and you know, they've identified the issues, but you know, who knows in 10, 15 years time whether anything else could be there. But if we don't do this work urgently, that building will continue to deteriorate, and you know, we certainly will have, and I can guarantee you then, we will continue to have problems with it. So you know, I guess my request, my message is that while I know it's painful, let's get this sorted out as best we can. Get it sorted out now, so that we get it back onto a healthy sort of status, if you like, yep, and to minimise the chances of future problems.
Thanks. Just supplementary. I don't want to go too far off the subject because we've got a motion in front of us. But what should we have done differently back in 14 years ago? What can we learn about this right now?
Well, one of the things that that Marty and I have talked about, and I think Marty's initiated, is having a review of, if we can, what were some of the decisions made and how that was done. And look, neither of us around. In fact, I don't think there's many people, and certainly I wasn't around at that time. But what I've been able to find out, I think, is there are a number of factors. One is that the construction company, I think, used inferior material. So, for example, part of this project is we have to put a new pipe down in the production bore. And if you remember last year, we had to re-drill it. The reason for that is that the material they used is substandard. So we've had to get, you know, a pipe from Taranaki that they use for oil drilling, and that's the sort of standard needed. So throughout the building there are examples of substandard materials. There's examples of substandard construction, you know, where they just simply have taken shortcuts. I suspect that there are design issues. We certainly saw that with the seismic work that we had to do. So those are some of the things that you know, I'm aware of. Often with projects like this too, and once again I'm only speaking speculation, but having been involved in some other big projects outside of Tauranga, often there's a real budget constraint. So you want to do a big project, you get told you can't have the 35 million, you can only have 25 million, so it gets spec'd down. You get the project across the line, it gets built, but you pay for it later on. And I think that could well be a real learning that, you know, we need to take on board. And I'm only speculating, but I suspect that that may well be an issue as well. So those are some of the things I think that have perhaps contributed to where we are at the moment.
Just to follow up, and it relates to some of the detail you've given, and thank you for that, Gary. It's that sort of forthrightness is appreciated, although I hope you've taken advice. Whatever we're planning to do needs to make sure it stays in place for 35 years to fit the 50-year depreciation schedule that we're currently running. Again, there is some experience in this city where we've got into a situation of sort of possibly perhaps repeating an error where we've done the budget thing, and then when we've come to repair, we've repeated the same pattern and the repairs haven't delivered. So I suppose is it unreasonable to ask for reassurance that in terms of approaching this, you're very clear that you're looking at that thing's got to last 35 years. We've got to get the substance and structure and materials back on track on that depreciation schedule, or we're just creating a legacy debt for someone down the line?
I can give you that assurance that the quality of the work and project management and everything associated with it will, provided we get the funding, will be up to a standard that, you know, is where it should have been when it was first built. BVL, myself, the board, our staff, we have got no desire whatsoever to present you with a budget that's inadequate, do a sloppy job, and have to come back in 5 or 10 years' time with the same issue. So we would, as I said earlier, we want to get it done now, get it done right. And even though it's painful, I think that's what the building deserves, and I think that's what the city deserves.
Yeah, just a question, but it's going to be off the top of your head, really. But Mayor Brownless and Councillor Carrack might remember what the project was back when they were on council in 2005. But to build a facility like that today would be what, 20 million, 30 million, you know, what would it be to?
So the Sport New Zealand best practice guide to building this type of facility estimates around 30 million, which is what we've based the project cost on for the Memorial Park project.
And then add another 10 or 15 million if you want a 50-lap pool, sorry, a 50-metre pool. It's your call.
That was the debate at the time, as to whether a 50-metre pool went in then. But yeah, thanks. Just puts in perspective the 2 million. You know, that we have a very valuable facility. We have to keep going.
If I could just add to that, I mean, it is even though it's a building that's in many ways in a sad state, it still is a very, you know, good building. We've still got a lot of people coming through and enjoying it, but there are these structural issues that we do need to address.
I just wanted to ask if it's appropriate, Mr. Chair, if we could do a site visit to see. There's nothing like seeing it up close and personal, particularly if you can get down into the pump rooms, and I think it'd be good for councillors to actually see these problems for themselves.
Certainly be happy to give you a guided tour.
A question for Christine, really, is given the fact that we're outside the legal remedy situation, do we do a substantive review of buildings, say, in about the 9th year, so that we can potentially claim if there is an issue with the quality of the construction?
Through the chair, just checking with Paul as well, because much of the property sits within Paul's portfolio, so not aware that we have a sort of a systematic review. We do have a defects period on many of our contracts, including those for you know, water and wastewater infrastructure. We do check everything is up to standard or claim on those defects periods, but I don't think there's the sort of review that you're talking about, and there's no reasons why we couldn't introduce those or do that on a risk assessed base, so on higher value, higher risk type of facilities, and things like this are really one-off spec built, as opposed to some of our waters and transport infrastructure where we're repeat building the same type of infrastructure.
I don't think there's much in the way of choice here, as Councillor Baldock's effectively pointed out. We have effectively a $30 million facility that requires some spending to remain a viable $30 million facility. We would be silly to scrimp on what needs to be done and wind up repeating this conversation 3 years, 4 years, 5 years down the line. I don't want to be part of that. I'm comforted by the assurance from Mr. Dawson that he will give us a figure that will do the job properly, and he will not resile from that. I am very much encouraged by that. I commend this idea.
Thank you. I'm encouraged by the fact that last year you undertook the work to take the building from a D to a C, and I think you did that in a very efficient and effective way, so thank you for that. And really, we don't have any choice. We just have to swallow this and get on and do the job as quickly as possible, and of course as effectively as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we need to get on with the work as soon as possible. I personally would like to see some work done on what judicial remedies may be available to council. There are a number of projects within a similar time frame, and just rolling off the top of my head, we've of course got this building here, top story done by Mainzeal. There's the Maryvale Action Centre, which had issues as well, Baywave, etc. And I think that we should consider those with the same zeal that anybody in the private sector or private individual would.
Yeah, I agree we should get on with it. The AIMS Games this year is crucial, that the work can be done. I note, Gary, that you are wanting to get underway on it very quickly. I think it makes sense, as you've said, to do the other things in the facility that will add revenue, ultimately add people coming that you already have budget for. I'm not sure that it's worth spending too much time pursuing judicial reviews. It's worth having a report perhaps from our legal staff, but this is happening all over the country and very few people are getting much back. It's just, it is from an era, and it still goes on, where people choose the cheapest and find it's not the cheapest actually. The idea of this, tendering and taking the cheapest price has to stop, because we're having to just spend this sort of money. We need to make sure we got partnerships with reliable and reputable contractors that will serve us in years to come, rather than just one-offs who turn up, have the ability to undercut others, and then we find they've used cheaper materials, as you pointed out, Gary, happening too much. So I support very much we get this working, because it is a very valuable asset. Imagine if we didn't have this in the city, we'd be having to spend a lot more.
Yeah, just to support what people are saying, we don't have a choice, we have to swallow the rat. But I do think that whilst we may not get a financial return from the judicial remedies, certainly people who have been involved in the design should have accountability for this, and it's about people when they do design these types of things not being able to walk away. This is a professional era, and accountability, public accountability for public buildings is absolutely imperative, and we should hold people to what they were charging us for.
Any other speakers? Right, Councillor Robson, right of reply.
Yeah, look, I get the feeling this is going to be sort of go through. Just two observations. In my head, I don't see this as additional spend by the ratepayers of Tauranga. In other words, in my head, we're going to have to look at somewhere else when we're going through our annual plan process to figure out what we're not going to do to provide and protect the facilities we already have. I think one of the challenges we face sometimes is we wind up taking lower offers so we can have more stuff. And I think it's important to have the right stuff, the right quality, that's very much sustainable. In regard to the legal remedy issue, I concur with Councillor Baldock. I think that you're probably chasing a piece of legal paper which will cost you much and produce very little by way of financial return. That being the case, I also think we need to recognise the existence in New Zealand of the limited liability company, and within the last 12 months we've signed a relationship agreement with someone who actually only came into existence last year. They have no significant asset base to speak of as far as I can tell looking at them. I think we need to be very careful who we get into partnership with, and certainly large, well-capitalised organisations with a long-standing reputation for delivery, they're few and far between. We need to be careful who we get into bed with. As I say, Johnny-come-latelys and companies that only start 2 months before you sign the contract, we need to think very carefully about doing stuff like that.
Okay, so I'll put that all in favour, say aye. Aye. Against? So that's carried. Thanks very much once again, Justine and Gary. DC 16, amendment to the traffic and parking bylaws. Now, did you want to say anything or just field questions, Mark?
Oh, through the chair, I'll just bring your attention to the item in there that talks about the bus lanes on Links Avenue. Just to bring your attention to this, we're trying to formalise that bus lane there now.
Move. Oh, yeah. What do you?
Sorry, I was just Martin. What's the? I noticed that some of these it says here that the retailers requested a new loading zone. So what's actually the process for that? Because Main Street Days, I thought you had to have buy-in from a number of retailers around you. What's the actual process when someone requests a different time zone?
It depends on the extent of the restriction. So if it's like a loading zone, it's normally just outside one business. So if that business person generally agrees it and their neighbours do, then we'll proceed. If it's obviously a wider impact, then we'll go out to wider consultation. So it really depends on the location.
We need a second. Yeah, no, I do support it. There is a concern around the 60k limit, which a lot of people expressed a concern that it may be too low, but I think we need to see how it goes. We're not at that report yet. That's a later one. You were there too. All said.
I just wanted to actually thank staff for putting in the report which suburb they're in. It makes it a lot easier to understand and look out as a ward councillor what areas are affected. So thank you for doing that.
Though that's carried. Just need to go back to DC4, which is exemption for open competition for Totara Street level crossing safety works. And who will speak? Is that you again, Martin?
I'll just quickly say this is, I'll start by saying we deferred the wider safety projects along Totara Street at the direction of councillors, but this is an opportunity to work with KiwiRail, who are doing upgrades to these two level crossings. So we thought we'd take that opportunity to work with them to do the safety works for pedestrians and cyclists at these two locations. It's cheaper to do it now than do it separately, basically.
How could we be certain that we're getting a competitive price, given it's going through KiwiRail, and have we seen any evidence of some pricing tension there? You know, my concern is, of course, you know, could we be being taken advantage of in terms of accommodating KiwiRail work into the contract? And
yeah, I mean, we have seen a breakdown of the overall costs associated with it. It's difficult to say whether you're getting a competitive rate when it actually hasn't gone out to open competition, but KiwiRail would have gone out to open competition for their works anyway across their network in their sort of rail corridors anyway. So we believe we're getting value for money. We're also getting 51% subsidy on this from the Transport Agency.
Has TCC got some kind of engineer's estimate in terms of costings for its portion?
We haven't, no. No, sorry, I will rephrase that. We've got engineer's estimate for the overall Totara Street project. We'd need to go back and break it down to the specific location. But we've been working very closely with KiwiRail on this.
part of my question was going to be about the subsidy. So that is one thing that has been confirmed. So is it 2 crossings?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. It's just hard to delve into the design to see how it gobbles up $1.2 million, really. If they're already doing safety improvements themselves, I assume that's affecting the roadway. We're laying in some, looks like we're laying in some things that make it easier for cyclists to go over it. Is that, or are we paying for these barriers and stuff?
They're paying a portion of the barrier costs, as well as we're paying for the safety improvements for the pedestrians and cyclists in particular.
To the railway.
To cross the railway lines, and then there's the traffic management costs, which are, you know, these things do add up, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, it seems safety ought to be KiwiRail's responsibility. Really, it's their crossing. So I hope we're not contributing too much to things like the barriers and stuff, because that's their domain.
Well, they see the safety with regard to vehicles crossing their corridor and pedestrians and cyclists as our responsibility. Yes. Yep.
I mean, if their railway line wasn't there, our cyclists and motorists would have no problem, so I can't see how they split them out.
I suppose it was what came first, chicken or the egg, really, isn't it? You know.
Yeah, there were definitely tracks along there. That's foot tracks before there were railway tracks, if you go back far enough. So, but however, it is a bit of a pattern that unfortunately we pick up a lot of things that perhaps government or their agencies do. Councillor Brown.
Martin, just looking at the diagrams, it says here on the rail crossing key automatic gates. Does that, and it's hard to distinguish if that's actually automatic gates, but does it mean that cyclists, when the arms go down, that the cyclists won't be able to cross as well? It'll actually prevent them?
That's correct. So automatic gates that will prevent pedestrians and cyclists crossing the rail tracks, and that's where a lot of the cost comes in. It's all these automated systems out there. Yep.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you for that extra level of detail, but it does have me wondering now. There's an enormous amount of railway line in this city, which is frequented by people crossing it for various reasons. As a matter of fact, you need to walk on it to climb up the bridge to jump into the estuary, which is, you know, most unreasonable of KiwiRail to put trains through that jumping off spot. How necessary, you know, I mean, at what level are we building this safety? What's the metric? What's the justification for this? Where are we with this? Is it over the top? Short question.
From an infrastructure and safety perspective, I don't think it's over the top. I mean, we have had fatalities in this city at level crossings with pedestrians and cyclists in the past, and in the recent past. We also had an incident at one of these level crossings where a wheelchair user got stuck in the rail lines with a train approaching, which was quite obviously a frightening experience. So, and if we do proceed with the Tota Street safety project over the whole length, then this is quite an integral part of that project in the future.
So moving forward, given the number of crossings, and I'm thinking of the one at Bayfair, Marapihi Road, and that's where there was a death some years ago with a cyclist riding straight in front of a train. It was really unfortunate. And the solution in place at the time was the rail, where you do like a 90-degree turn, so you have to slow down and negotiate around the barrier, which is the safety solution. And I know at that point currently there's a high usage along that cycleway along Marapihi Road, and what a lot of people do, and including myself, is to avoid that barrier situation, is to then just go onto the road, which obviously in terms of cyclist or pedestrian versus train is safe because there are bells in the barrier. But in terms of the potential car versus cyclist, there is an element of danger there. That's why I do support this solution, because it will be continuous for the cyclist to stay off the road. I understand that. But in terms of moving forward, would this solution be potentially put in place at the Marapihi Road crossing and other crossings where there's a high number of cyclists?
There is that potential. I mean, these are the new what we call ALCAM standards, so for rail crossings in New Zealand and Australia. So these have been developed to deal with these types of issues in a safe manner, because of the number of fatalities that have happened at level crossings in the recent past. I mean, it's a considerable number of pedestrians and cyclists are killed at level crossings. Yep.
Following up Councillor Kurak's line of thinking, how many crossings in the city are we looking at here? If you're looking at and saying this is the right standard for crossings, and you know, we're a city that's bedeviled by railways in some respects, but I'm just so pleased to know that the Regional Council makes so much money out of that port due to the sacrifices of our city. How many crossings are we talking about here? Has someone scoped, you know, I'm big on the word precedent, but has someone scoped the implications of saying this is the standard for crossings in Tauranga? What are we looking at? What's the 10-year plan budget now for putting these in place? Because at $1 million a throw, you know, this could start to build up very, very quickly.
It's basically KiwiRail have a program of level crossings that they wish to upgrade each year throughout New Zealand. They determine that list based on urgency of upgrade works or safety. So that's sent out each year to every road controlling authority, so they understand what implications may be. So that can be obviously budgeted for, because you know they receive a subsidy, we receive a subsidy as well. So when you go to decide you're going to upgrade a level crossing, that's when you have to meet the new standards that have been approved. Currently, the only sites we're looking at to work on are these two on Totara Street. So they have to meet the new standards.
I'll just get a question and then Councillor Molloy. So there's 1.2 million, but what is the actual amount the council has to, you know, taking the subsidies, the amount that KiwiRail puts in, what do we actually have to write a cheque out for?
Well, it'll be about, just about half of that 1.2 million, about just under $600,000.
Councillor Morris suggested we should go out for design and build and see if we get a cheaper rate. Just Totara Street, do we have a good understanding with the port, NZTA and ourselves as to the future use and control of Totara Street? I mean, that's you know, we're doing things on it now, and I don't know whether we really understand where we're going with this.
Through the Chair, this is being identified as one of the key areas in the stock-taking gap analysis in terms of the Hewletts Road, Totara Street area. It is within the scope of the Urban Form and Transport Initiative, and there'll be further information on this to the Smart Growth Leadership Team group on the 20th of March. So it's certainly within that scope, looking at the longer term. So this is really trying to deal with immediate safety issues that we have on the network, and there's a longer term question about capacity, growth, interrelationship between rail and road, and cyclists and pedestrians, etc., that all need to be looked at.
I mean, it may well be that at some stage we write to our colleagues at the Regional Council asking for their assistance with these, considering these are vital links to the port, which, you know, is a high earner for the region, not so much for the city. So that could be something we would want to do, especially if we have to roll this out over other things. Any other questions or something, entertain a resolution? Well, I'll move it, see if I get a seconder. Okay, and in speaking to it, say that you know, the money does seem high. I do take the point that we probably may as well do it while Kiwi Rail are working in the area, and then the cost is approximately half. Having bumped over it myself, I'm aware of what it's like, you know, and I do think it does need some sort of treatment, that's for sure. But going forward, I would actually like to look at other partners who actually benefit from that rail link, putting their hands deeper in their pockets for future works, especially as it is quite expensive. That's what I have to say. Seconder, any other speakers? Yeah, Councillor Mason.
Yeah, I use that crossing Ferry Mount on the bike, and just I think absolutely support safety mechanisms as cycleways become more popular, as they have done in London. I see Councillor Robson cringing. We hope to see the Mayor of Tauranga on his bike as well, cycling.
Like
cycling.
that, come October, get the Councillor Clouders moving.
I mean that in the nicest way.
He can't reach the bed.
Certainly supported.
Yeah, I'm just looking forward to Councillor Mason moving a motion to put a congestion charge on the city and ring fence it. With regard to the process, I am a little concerned that if safety is a genuine concern, that we allow our timetabling of our safety improvements for our crossings to be determined by Kiwi Rail's improvement plan rather than looking at the requirements of the citizens of our city. In other words, we upgrade when Kiwi Rail decides to put some money in the tin. That seems to be somewhat short of a principled position. I appreciate where we're going with this. It seems to make sense at one level. However, I'd like some sort of report from staff over how many crossings we've got and what the potential is. In other words, I'd like to know that we're not just operating purely ad hoc and there is some assessment of the risk around the other crossings in the city. I would not want to be in a situation of to have an accident happen at a crossing that are a higher risk profile than this one. And when someone says, why did you choose this one? We said, well, because Kiwi Rail were doing some work there. So just a request for some sort of feedback from staff confirming the number of crossings and the risk profile around them would be appreciated. I just want to know I'm making a good decision here.
Yeah, through the chair, we'll go away and have a look at that. Well, we'll need to have that discussion with Kiwi Rail as well, because they determine which crossings are upgraded based on safety. So there's a bit of work. There's a bit of work to be done with them, but we'll look into that.
Yes, I will support it. But further to Councillor Robson's request for this information, and thinking about the Marapi Road crossing, which was recently built. It was a new structure, the crossing, because of the shift in railway alignment to build the B2B project. So it was, as I understand, an NZTA project. So it does come as some surprise that the new standard wasn't in place at that time, obviously, because it's a zigzag barrier solution, certainly not the barrier arm solution proposed for this location. So yeah, it is unfortunate it wasn't put in place there, because you know, you do a number count of the number of cyclists using that crossing, it would be far higher than the Totara Street at this present time.
No right of reply, so I'll put that all in favour, say aye. Aye. Against. So that's carried. We'll just adjourn for 15 minutes now. Thank you. Turn the Okay, folks, we'll resume the meeting. DC 35, Amendment to Speed Limit Bylaw, Mangatapu Underpass. Okay, and Martin, do you want questions or do you want to speak to it?
I think the report's fairly self-explanatory, so I think we'll just go straight for questions, Your Worship.
Yep. Councillor Granger.
Mr. Parks, I see number 13 where it states here, without NZTA approval, council cannot legally implement 70k. And in other words, we'd be wasting our time to try for 70k when that's noted.
Your statement's correct, yeah. Under the new speed setting of speed limit rules, if you wanted to agree to a 70k speed limit, NZTA would have to approve that, but they would only authorise it if you're working towards lowering that speed limit to 60 through other measures. So essentially what you've got here is it's a 60 or an 80, but it,
as I read through the information, it was clearly noted from NZTA that they're approving the 60k.
They're very happy with the 60.
So in other words, we're wasting our time if we tried for 70. It's just that the majority, you can see, have scored at over 50%, and that was including myself, to be honest. And
yep.
It's just that we'd be wasting, or anyone would be wasting their time to.
I think you would. I mean, it'll put us at odds with NZTA and the new national speed limit guide, which is quite clear that NZTA want to see more consistency in speed limit approvals across the country, and they are trying to remove all the 70s and 90 speed limits in New Zealand, so there's a bit more consistency across the country.
Yeah, I just felt if you're talking to a few others out there as well, it's just that running through that underpass, of course there's no driveways, there's no other. They felt the possibilities of any accidents being caused, especially at that rate, because I can remember the old well, it's still up there now, so I can remember the 70k that used to be along there, and
just one other point I'd like to make is the underpass was designed for a 60k speed limit, so you need to take that into consideration as well.
Thanks, Mark.
And a consideration in terms of that design would have been the potential for nose to tail, as you know, the congestion, the tailback could stop at the top, and a car coming over the ridge, or whatever you call it.
It's certainly a more complex part of the road network than it was prior to the underpass, when there was a 70 in that area. So there's a lot more in the way of merges and conflict points than there were previously.
I think it's the best we can do, and it's time to move on.
I think, you know, when we think about other situations where there was some concern expressed about a speed limit was outside the Mount Maunganui College, in response to a death of a student there were car parking was removed, making the road wider, and people saying, well, the road environment didn't suit the 50k limit. But, you know, as time goes past, everyone's sort of comfortable with it now. They understand the limits there, and it still provides a reasonable speed for traffic to travel through that area, and I think that would apply in this situation. So we'll support it in this instance.
Any other speakers then, or write a reply if you want one, but okay, so I'll put that all in favour, say aye. Aye. Against, so that's carried. Then DC 51, revised committee structure. If there are any questions, and then otherwise I'll move. Yeah, Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just wondering whether the wording of C should say notes the committee structure as opposed to adopts. It's within the mayor's prerogative to be able to appoint. However, the mayor also may delegate that to council as well. That's my understanding. So that's a question, I suppose. The second thing is a point. Could we take the resolution separately, please? Thank you.
Adopt it, because you do have the right to reject it. So, yeah, yeah. Councillor Baldock. Yeah.
So under that B, approve the appointment of.
Yeah.
It's just foreshadowing the names to be done later.
Yes.
Is it?
Yeah.
And those currently on are just
are not on in the meantime.
Are not on until they are reappointed. Yeah.
It's a new. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Are they aware of that position, that of the change they've been front-footed?
I'll move it, and then I'll move the following for Urban Form and Transport, Chairperson Councillor Baldock and Deputy Councillor Kurak, Policy Chairperson Morris and Deputy Councillor Malloy, Project Services Councillor Brown and Deputy Councillor Mason, and Finance Audit Risk Councillor Robson and Deputy Councillor Clout. And so I'll move all the others as well. I need a seconder. Seconder Councillor Clout. And then I'll take the, I'll do A, and then I'll do B separately, and then I'll do the rest. Sound all right? Okay. So, so all those in favour of A, sorry, I've moved and seconded, but I haven't given a chance for any other speakers, so I better do that now. Councillor Robson?
I note that there's no explicit statement that we're actually dissolving the committees that already exist anywhere in the recommendations. I don't see it, and I just wonder whether that, you know, I mean, obviously but it should go without saying, but there are some people who are quite pedantic about these things. It just
okay.
I don't want to see four more.
Well, through you, Your Worship, that can be stitched into the first resolution.
Okay.
Approve
so
the dissolution and the dissolution of the
current
existing
committees.
Yep.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, so with my seconder's approval, we'll change that wording to approve the disestablishment of the current standing committees and approve the establishment of, just reads the same after that. Any other speakers? Yeah, Councillor Robson.
Just speaking to the motion, the name of the, I think the Urban Form and Transport Development Committee, I just observing that the name may come with some baggage at some time in the future, but I think the principle and the scope for that committee is vitally important. Yep. I believe it's one of the most fundamental changes we've made to the way I've seen the city governed for a long time, and effectively I believe we are taking back responsibility for the shape and the future of this city in creating this committee, and I commend the structure on that basis.
Any other speakers at the moment? Okay, so I'll put A, so all in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. And B, that's the Tangata Whenua representatives, all in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Okay, and we'll just record that Councillor Morris is against that, so that's carried. And then can I do the rest together? C, D, E. Yeah, Councillor Robson.
Are you speaking to the motion, Your Worship? Are you speaking to the amendment or speaking to whatever we're calling this, putting in parts, or are we just taking it you've already spoken? If I could speak to particularly this, I've always had some concerns with the chairperson thing, so for the record, can we advise what the additional payment to a chairperson is? Over and above that of a councillor?
Through the chair, if I may address, we had some advice from the Remuneration Authority as of yesterday, because as you may be aware, ahead of the next triennium, there is the move to the pool. So there will be changes from now to the 1st of July, then a 1st of July change to the end of the triennium. So we will get a note to you shortly, because we'll just need to work through those changes and what it will mean. But essentially there will be a base level from 1 July till October, and then a chance to think about then what would they get on top of that base for the chairs and deputies.
Okay. If I can continue. Whatever it is, I will be donating it to the Tauranga Women's Refuge. I have no care for the additional revenue that comes with being a chair. And in regard to my comments earlier with regard to the Urban Form and Transport Development Committee, I'd like to put on record that I would like to have seen the Mayor chair that committee. I believe it's the appropriate leadership role for chair. And whoever chairs it in place of the Mayor, I would urge them to make sure, given the importance of it, that they work their hardest to carry the consensus of this council with them. Because if we don't agree on what comes out of that committee, the rest of what we do is hopelessly compromised.
Okay, so I will, Councillor Mason.
Yeah, no, it's, I think it's a good committee structure. I think that there were some issues with the previous structure, as we've discussed. There were, however, some one or two, and perhaps a few more good things that came out of the previous structure. I think a focus on some of the well-beings was useful, and in particular, I think that the environment strategy that developed out of it gave us more of a focus on the environment and not just sort of delegated to some extent onto the regional council. So I think Councillor Morris, thank you for leading that up, and I would urge the Chief Executive not to let that fall by the wayside, or the good work that was done to develop that. Another aspect I think is very important is that we will have in this new forum have the general managers up in the front. I just want to, I guess, highlight that I think this is a very good structure. It's not just structure, but it's also the way that we work together. Noting, I think the councillors should note that the brain's on that side of the room, not necessarily on this side of the room, and we should move.
Speak for yourself.
And we should always remember that. And I do think that we potentially have a new era going forward where we will take advice more from the other side of the room, and let's hope this becomes a little bit more of a circle and then the other side of the room, or a difference between us. I think there has been discussion in the past of all one team, and I'd very much like to see that further developed. But it depends on trust and confidence in each other. And I think that's where we're going with this. That's really the ultimate aim, is having trust and confidence in each other, and all being one team for the betterment of the city.
I think the previous or the current committee structure resulted in a degree of distraction for this organisation. I'm thinking of Environment Committee, Community and Culture, and this will get us back on track to really focus in on some really important parts of this organisation and what it delivers to the community, and in particular housing, supply and transport. And I think this will result in good things and less distraction to get on with the key business of this organisation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just in relation to B, which was just passed, I do look forward to the appointment on merit of a diverse bunch of councillors one day by the electorate. However, the appointment on the basis of ancestry or who somebody's grandfather is not appropriate in my view in 21st century democracies. That being said, I've heard some rather alarming comments yesterday and even in the chamber earlier on today people, it has given me some pause.
Yes, just to assure Councillor Robson that in taking the chair role for the Urban Form and Transport Development Committee, I will take it very seriously. It is a very important committee with a big workload, and trying to work all together going forward is very, very important. I hope our public don't think that we've suddenly lost the transformational aspects of our city, because they are still very much a part of it. But really the focus does have to be on housing supply and transport, as Councillor Kurak, my deputy, says. And it is good to combine them, because we are needing to mount that argument very clearly and strongly that unless the central government come to the party and see us provide not only land but transport solutions as well, we will be in a real crisis in the city very soon. Some developers have estimated 1,000 sections left, you know, and we've been chewing through 1,600 a year. So we must work hard on that, otherwise the cost of housing is going to go up, the availability of rentals is going to go up, and all of that have bad social consequences. The Tauranga Urban Strategy is part of our transformation of the city, and that will be something we work hard on that committee as well, and it will involve the CBD as well. This is where we need to see transformation occur, with thousands of people living in this area as part of the transformation of our retail and CBD and commercial centre. So look forward to it for the next 6 meetings. And we don't know after that what's going to happen, but somebody will carry it on, and this is a long-term project to get our city back on track. I will conclude by saying that it was beginning of this triennium, sort of January, February, when our first Smart Growth meeting was held in this chamber in 2017, and my first speech at that committee was about the ring road, the strategic roading network that has been left behind in our city and is contributing, you know, very, very much to the congestion we're experiencing. It's a different environment now. It's no longer sufficient to talk about our road network. We have to talk about transport solutions. We have to talk about modal shift. And all of that is what we will do in this committee to make the case that we can avoid what we see in Auckland every time we visit it. And I thought we were avoiding it 15 years ago, but we are now in catch-up mode, and we really do have to work hard to deliver our city from that sort of congestion, which is so debilitating and time-wasting and economic wasting for everybody involved.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to chair the Project Services and Operations Committee. I reflect that when we started this triennium, we were encouraged to look 70% way forward and 30% retrospective and monitoring, and I think that was to our demise, and we've dropped the ball in a number of projects, and Te Papa Ona Mauropara Takataka is definitely one of them. So now with a focus on some more monitoring, keeping our eye on the ball, and actually, you know, it's the services and it's the activities and projects that have everyday consequences for our community, and that's what matters to them the most, and we need to make sure that we do the best that we can to deliver what they're expecting of us.
Well, Councillor Granger.
Off here. Look, the previous committee structure we had, I think, to be honest, we were quite lenient towards the public speakers that did come in, and we gave them a little bit more leeway. But I just want to pass this on to the new chairs, that let us not forget who these people are, and when they come forward to speak, give them the respect, give them that little bit of leniency they may need, because I tell you what, for some it's the first time in here, and sometimes emotions, they do get carried away, but we have to be very, very careful, and I advise the chairs to be respectful and give them a little bit of leeway. Thank you.
Well, I will just say a few things in my right of reply, and that is that each of these committees here is important, and the one that hasn't been mentioned, or the two of them so far, is the Policy Committee. Thanks to Councillor Morris for agreeing to look at that, and Finance, Audit and Risk. And although we're not going to consider an outside appointment to this triennium, it's something we could look at for the new one. I thank all the chairs, and personally, for the very little extra that you get, you probably wouldn't do it for that. You're not doing it for that. So that's important to note. When it comes to urban form and transport, we know that we've talked about getting our share. We're not asking government to do anything that's our responsibility. I mean, we're putting a lot of money into water in the Waiari, and we're putting a lot of money into wastewater, but we are asking the government to do their responsibility, and that is the road connections with the state highways. And that's just so important, and it's so linked to the ability to be able to construct the many needed houses for people here, and hopefully that might have some sort of flow on effect in reducing prices. I'm not going to get into that because I just don't really know, but I do know we're short of houses, and I do know that until we get our road and transport connections right, we're going to have trouble delivering them. So, and I just see this as part of the change that we initiated. We're looking to get our governance better as governors. And I think we'll agree that we weren't at the top of our game at all, and that this is one of the steps that's been taken to get the council on track. And I think it sort of behoves us all to try and make this work. So that's all I've got to say, and I'd like to thank outgoing chairs and also external non-voting members in the previous committees for their efforts as well. So with that, I'll put, so that's C, D and E. I'll put that all in favour, say aye. Aye. Against. So that's cancelled. Carried. Yeah. Cancelled. Councilled. Cancelled. Yeah. That is carried. I better get it right since we're on camera. So I believe that concludes the open section, and just double check that I haven't missed anything. No. So somebody care to move? We move into confidential. Moved by Councillor Granger, seconded by Councillor Brown. All in favour say aye. Aye. Against? So that's carried. So